Dear students, this is Ms. Chen. Today, I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce a super powerful tool to you guys. I know that many of you would like to use your time, either during the break or during school year, to practice and refine your Chinese skills. So here's the tool. Let's go. To help you understand world language games better, I created this PowerPoint for you. So first of all, why do I say world language games is a super tool for you guys? The reason for that is because it has more than, I would say, 60 different games for you guys to play at home. And after you play the games, you will be able to take the tests, quizzes online to assess your own learning. And the good thing about this is because it is graded by computer, by the software, so you get instant feedback right away. Before we dive into world language games, I would like to invite you to add Simplified Chinese with Pinyin keyboard to your laptop or computer. And next thing is we need to have a good understanding of the format of this textbook. Okay, the textbook that we are using is called Integrated Chinese. Integrated Chinese is a series of textbooks. Volume 1 contains lesson 1 to lesson 10, and volume 2 contains lesson 11 to lesson 20. Each lesson has 2 little units, subunits. For example, for lesson 1, it has lesson 1 dialogue 1 and lesson 1 dialogue 2. Lesson 1 dialogue 1 also has its own vocabulary that goes with the dialogue. And lesson 1 dialogue 2 has its own vocabulary words that go with the dialogue by itself. This is a screenshot from the World Language Games website. So as you can see, if you select review, you will be able to see select unit. So before you play any games, you need to select a unit. So you can either practice the vocabulary in that unit or structures, which means the grammar from that unit, or sentences from that unit, or take online test from that unit. And now let's take a look at the first thing. Here is how I categorize and how I organize my lessons, because each lesson has a lot of vocabulary words, and I do not want to overwhelm my students. So I chunk down the vocabulary words in between 10 to 20, sometimes, like 10 to 18, I think 18 is the maximum. For students to practice at a time. And after they practice their vocabulary, they will be able to practice the structures, which means the grammar points. And then after they have a good understanding about the vocabulary and grammar, they will be able to practice with their sentences. Okay, so now let's take a look how I organize them in the next slide. So if you see like lesson, let's take lesson 1 as an example. Lesson 1 dialogue 1 has altogether 1 to 16, 17 to 30. So altogether lesson 1 dialogue 1 has 30 vocabulary words. So I chunk it into 2 parts. So students would practice 16 for the first time for the first set, and then 14 for the next set. It's easier to handle and it's not overwhelming. You can see these with the Chinese characters are all the smaller parts of the vocabulary. Yellow ones, you can see it's a bigger concept, like the medium concept of my unit. Okay, let's say lesson 3D1. So here, if you select L3D1, you'll be able to select vocabulary to play vocabulary games, or you can select structures to practice structure scramble, which is a grammar game. And then the blue part, if you select blue part is my biggest concept in this. Okay, so it is by lessons. So if you select lesson 1 right here, that means you will be able to practice all of the lesson 1 dialogue 1 and all of the lesson 1 dialogue 2 vocabulary. If you select vocabulary, you'll be able to play the games. And if you select the blue one, lesson 1, you will be able to practice all of the structures from lesson 1, from lesson 1 dialogue 2 and lesson 1 dialogue 1. After you select lesson 1 from the unit, then you'll be able to select structures and practice all of the structure games right there. And also, lesson 1 contains all of the lesson 1 sentences, but not to overwhelm my students, I only create about between 8 to 11 sentences for each lesson. So if you select lesson 1 from the unit and you go to sentences, you will be able to play some of the games to practice sentences. Okay, hope this is clear to you. And in our next slide, I will be explaining how the procedure should be. So you will have a smooth transition when you go from one game to another. Here is a sample procedure that I would suggest you to follow. Let's say you're studying lesson 1. The first thing I want you to do is to study lesson 1, dialogue 1, the first set of vocabulary, and then the second set of vocabulary. After that, you'll be able to practice lesson 1, dialogue 1 grammar through structure scramble. And I'll show you where the game is. There are many games right there, but I would suggest you to practice with this game. And after you practice with structures, you'll be able to read lesson 1, dialogue 1 dialogue from the textbook in the e-library. Where to find it, I'll show you in our next video. Then you will be taking lesson 1, dialogue 1 reading test. It's a comprehension test in story comprehension. Same thing, I'll show you in our next part of the video. To finish up lesson 1, dialogue 1, you are going to listen to lesson 1, dialogue 1, the textbook dialogue and stories from workbook in MP3 listening. And I'll show you where to find it in the next part of the video. Once you finish lesson 1, dialogue 1, then you go to lesson 1, dialogue 2. So you follow the same pattern. So first of all, vocabulary, after vocabulary, grammar, structure scramble, and then you read stories in e-library, then you test your reading skill in story comprehension. And the last thing is to listen to the MP3 listening to consolidate your knowledge in the vocabulary and sentences. Then the next step, as you can see, these are all tests. You may review all of the vocabulary from here to here, then you will be able to take a vocabulary test in Review Online Test 1. So where to find it? Let's see if I can go back to this slide. Okay, so here you select your unit. And then, for example, lesson 1, if you want to take a lesson 1 vocabulary test, you select lesson 1, then you select OLT. Then you'll be able to find the OLT, review OLT 1 to take the test. To take lesson 1 grammar test, of course, I want you to review again, review with lesson 1 dialogue 1 grammar through structure scramble and lesson 1 dialogue 2 grammar through structure scramble. Then you go to the grammar test by selecting review OLT 2. Let's go back to our last slide. So here, if you want to do the structures scramble, Then you go to lesson 1, select lesson 1 unit. Then you go to structures and you practice. After you practice, you can go to online test, select review online test 2. Then you will be able to assess your own skills. Anything below 80%, that means you need some more practice. The next part will be step 5. So after you do all of these, we make sure that you understand the reading, you understand the vocabulary and grammar. The last part, the most challenging part, is how to make sentences, how to create sentences, how to translate sentences. So step 5, practice lesson 1, sentences through sentence typing. Where can you find it? Right here. If you select lesson 1 under units, then you go to sentences right here. And the game that I would like you to practice is called sentence typing. And after you type several times, you will be able to take review online test 5 to test your skill. And if you can get 80% or above, that means you're good. If you do all these for one lesson, that means you would have a good and solid foundation. So you can move on to the next lesson, lesson 2. And I do not recommend you guys to skip lessons, because integrated Chinese has a very good sequence. So if you know all of the lesson 1 vocabulary, you'll be able to read lesson 2. But if you have some gaps in lesson 1, the reading in lesson 2 will be a little bit challenging for you. This slide shows you clearly, if you want to play vocabulary games, you can either select ones with Chinese characters, which is smaller chunks, or you can select different dialogues, or you can select the entire lesson. And to play structured games, you can select dialogues or just the complete lesson. For stories, it is also divided by dialogues and lesson. To listen to MP3, to practice your listening skill, same thing. It is divided by dialogues and lesson. To practice sentences, you only can select lesson, because each lesson would have only 8 to 11 sentences for you to practice.